So, Chris, you're the CEO of the largest hiring platform in the world. I understand you get 300 million visitors to your platform every month, and that's across 60 countries. So with that data, how do you see the labour force and the labour market at the moment, and what impact are you seeing from AI and generative AI?
Sue, thanks for having us here today. Thank you, everyone, for getting up early and braving the cold to join us. This is obviously the biggest question. Just walking down here, you can see AI plastered on the side of pretty much every single building. And the impact on the world, and in particular the world of work, is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. If you look globally, the labor market is certainly cooling right now, but it's still strong. Hiring and open jobs is above pre-pandemic levels. The real question is what is going to happen from the impact of AI on jobs. And so there's two ways that we look at it. One is just in the job listings themselves. So we have this front row seat to the global labor market. As you said, over 300 million job seekers, about 35 million jobs. When we look at the mention of, for example, generative AI in job postings, it has exploded exponentially since November of 2022 when ChatGPT launched. That exponential explosion, though, still is about 0.2% of all jobs. So we haven't even got to 1% of jobs. So it's in a very small area. It's having a very large impact. But then we also look at what is the impact of this technology on every other type of work. And so we concluded a big study at the end of last year. We looked at 2,800 distinct skills that we have on our platform across multiple different jobs, and assessed the ability of generative AI to perform those skills. And can it do those skills poorly, okay, pretty well, or very well? The headline summary of that is that there's really no skill that generative AI can completely replace as a human. But the exposure of jobs, so if you look at different sectors of the economy, there are certain jobs that have a much higher concentration of those skills that generative AI can perform. So at the top of the list, you look at things like software development, finance, legal, essentially the knowledge work. Those have the highest exposure. Most of those skills, the majority of those skills, are things that generative AI can do pretty well today. We have no idea what's going to happen in the coming years. On the other end of the spectrum, we have things that actually require primarily in-person presence. So things like childcare, healthcare, those construction, those things are extraordinarily low in terms of the potential impact. But when you sort those, what you get is a pretty clear view that nearly every job is going to change and evolve over the course of the next probably 3 to 5 years. And it is going to be an extraordinary time to see how that unfolds and how rapidly things change.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. I mean, if you look at it from perhaps even my perspective, you're saying knowledge-based jobs. I'm an analyst. But I'm actually really excited about all the tools that I can now use to, improve my work. So in that case, you'd probably still need a lot of human interaction than we've seen before.
Yeah, so absolutely. The biggest impact that we're seeing right now is the ability to augment individual skills. And we see that in our own tools. There's Indeed is a huge hiring platform. AI is the foundation of how we match 300 million job seekers and 35 million jobs. And one of the things that we see very clearly is that so AI drives the vast majority of the matching. About 60% of the matches that happen on Indeed are AI recommendations for job seekers. One of the things that we see clearly is we make recommendations to employers as well. When we make a recommendation to an employer and then they add their own judgment, so we show them maybe 20 or 30 candidates, they select the 10 that are best, those matches are twice as likely to lead to a hire than the AI-driven ones alone. So we see the biggest potential impact as AI and human judgment together being able to do something that neither can do alone.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Erik in a second, but just one more question back to that 0.2% or wherever you are. Of the total, how many percent are you expecting to get to? Or is it a reasonable target over 5 years? Because obviously a lot of the jobs, as you say, maybe nursing or dealing with childcare that might not take that. So what would be a good number?
Yeah, so those are job postings that mention generative AI in particular. So job postings that mention the use of AI somewhere in them. They peaked really in 2023 at about 4%. It's down to about 2% right now. We're starting to see it tick back up again. But it's also really clear, I mean, you see a whole bunch of job postings that are asking for things that are quite unreasonable, like 5 to 7 years experience in generative AI when it's been around for 2 years. It's hard to predict exactly where things will go, but it is very clear that what is expected of workers is going to evolve very rapidly.
Great, thank you. Turning to you, Erik. Improvements in productivity are desirable goals for governments and businesses alike. And yet one of the biggest concerns that we have is the fact that we could get structural unemployment as a result of generative AI. How do you see those two sort of opposing forces playing out over the next few years?
Yeah, great question. So, you walk down the street here and everything is all about AI. And that's appropriate because this is one of the most important technological revolutions that we've ever seen. It's a general purpose technology like the steam engine or electricity or the internet, but I think the effects will be bigger than those in a shorter period of time. And that's going to have effects on two broad areas, productivity and employment, like you said. The good news is on productivity, I think that we're going to have a big boost in that. Right now, the Congressional Budget Office is predicting about 1.4% productivity on average per year for the coming decade. I think that's way lowball. It's probably going to be more than double that, about 2.8 to 3%. I just did a National Academies report with Tom Mitchell and another team of experts, and we had some estimates in there. And the 1.4% is about what we had the past 10 to 15 years, so this is a really big uptick. It's going to make it much easier to solve a lot of our big problems in the United States. Other countries, I think, are going to see some similar improvements. At the same time, there's a lot of hype and a lot of wasted money. There's billions of dollars being spent on AI solutions that aren't going to pay off. And so there's just more confusion than we've ever seen before. And that's why we need to have a task-based or a skill-based approach to understand where the opportunities are. And so in some of my research that we published in academic articles, we looked at about 18,000 individual tasks to evaluate each of them as to whether or not there was an AI solution that could help with that. And very similar to what Chris was saying, we never saw just to step back a bit, every job can be thought of as a bundle of tasks. And we didn't find a single job where Gen AI or any of the technologies just ran the table and was able to do all the different tasks in that job. But we found almost every job there was some task that AI could help with. So it's really about a restructuring of work. And if you do it with this data-driven approach, you're able to understand much better. We've taken it a step further in a company I founded called WorkHelix, where we now have about 250,000 very fine-grained tasks that you could look at. So then that comes to what's happening to employment. And what we're seeing there is a great deal of job destruction, but also job creation. AI is going to destroy a lot of jobs and rearrange, but it's also going to create a lot. And that's what's happened with every earlier technology. This is not new. It's going to accelerate going forward. The successful companies and the successful countries are not going to be the ones that try to freeze in place what's been working in the past. They're going to be the ones that lean in to the dynamism and think about how they can use these technologies to do new things that weren't being done before. And if you do that, it's going to be rocky, but you're more likely to be able to come out on the other side by taking advantage of those new opportunities. And by doing the task-based analysis, you can see where those opportunities are. Chris gave a good list of some of the places where we see the opportunities, but ultimately, every company has a unique fingerprint of opportunities. Literally hundreds of thousands of individual tasks that can be evaluated to see where the opportunities are. And we're seeing coding, customer service, sales. These are some of the ones that are on the forefront of taking advantage of the technologies to the greatest extent.
Yeah, I've got loads of questions after that. I mean, if you look at productivity from a government perspective, productivity in Europe is about 18% lower. Had an 18% gap between the US over the last...
further and further behind.
Yeah, do you think, because obviously US is on the forefront of this technology, do you think that because, AI adoption can be very fast-paced, we saw how quickly ChatGPT got taken up by customers, do you think that Europe has a chance of catching up? Do you think it's going to be...
It has a chance,
but sort of a bit of a curve?
That gap highlights the real difficulty. See, the technology is available to almost everyone. You can like log on and use ChatGPT. And even though a lot of the tech companies are in the United States inventing it, people all over the world have access to it. The real barrier, the real bottleneck is not advancing the technology. It's figuring out how to use it and transform your businesses. And to do that, you actually need more dynamism and more flexibility. And unfortunately, Europe has a lot of regulatory, cultural, and other barriers that make this job creation harder and this dynamism harder. So what we're working on at the Stanford Digital Economy Lab and at WorkHelix is trying to close that gap. It's great what's happening with the hundreds of billions of dollars that's being invested in pushing the tech frontier, but I don't see that as the barrier. It's figuring out how to use it more effectively. In Europe, they were about 95% of American productivity around the year 2000. They were converging, and it looked like they were going to catch up. And since then, they've begun to fall further and further behind. And since the year 2020, the gap has gotten even bigger. And I think that reflects not a lack of access to technology, ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs, Anthropic, et cetera. It really reflects this inability to translate technology into productivity. And by the way, this has also been true for earlier technologies. With electricity, it took 20 to 30 years before the full benefit occurred, and the companies that were willing to make that business transformation were the ones that got the benefits much faster. So that's where I'm focusing my efforts, is understanding how to close that gap.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So turning to you, Chris, how do you envisage the jobs that we do in terms of the tasks and the skills that we're going to need changing over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so maybe just to build a little on what Erik was saying. So productivity is clearly a huge opportunity, but it's also a necessity. So when we look from a global macro perspective, one of the biggest challenges is we have declining birth rates and an aging workforce. Yeah. And if you look in Japan, in Korea, in China, in the Eurozone, we're sort of at the start of a race right now between a shrinking labor force and productivity potential gains from AI. And so it's actually going to be really essential that we're able to sort of take advantage of this. I think if you look at the impact, so I said before, nearly every job has some exposure, which means that nearly every job is going to evolve and probably pretty rapidly. If we take one specific one, so I started my career in tech as a software developer. I was writing code in 1993. That job looks very different than what a coding job looks like today. One of the questions that people ask about these different skills is, are there going to be more or fewer of a specific worker? My point of view, and there's no data that anyone could point to that's going to say what will or won't happen. My point of view is that in the future there will be 10 times as many people who are coders than there are today. What they're doing will look absolutely nothing like what a software developer does today. It will be completely unrecognizable. And so when you think about that, if you look at the impact of the World Wide Web, so the internet's been around for a long time. If you look at the impact of the web on the nature of work, the work of a journalist, the work of a taxi driver, totally unrecognizable from what those. If you sat down in 1995 and showed a taxi driver or a journalist or a teacher what that job looks like today, their mind would be completely blown. And so I think that it is entirely likely that 30 years of change of the workforce is going to get crammed into the next 3 years, 4 years.
Do you, we're not really educating children perhaps enough in AI yet. I'm not sure the teachers have the skills, but how do you see that evolving? Because, we should be helping, right from the bottom generations. Have you got some thoughts on that and how it's playing out? Because the States is going to be very different from what...
So one of the biggest challenges, and this is a big trend in hiring right now, and something that we're very focused on, is the idea of skills-based hiring. So hiring for skills instead of experience. Yep. That is hugely valuable in terms of opening the aperture for opportunity to people that don't have, for example, a 4-year college degree. In the U.S., about 36% of the workforce has a 4-year college degree, and yet there's a huge number of jobs that require that. So if you can hire based on skills instead of experience, you can do a better job of finding people who are ideally qualified. The problem is there's a whole set of skills right now that we don't even know what they are. What is probably most necessary for someone to be employable in the decades to come, more than anything else, is adaptability. Mm-hmm. curiosity and adaptability. So it's actually going to become less and less important what knowledge you have, because knowledge is now at your fingertips. Reasoning, logic, there's a whole bunch of things that these technologies can do for us. The ability to be curious and to embrace. So the problem is our education system teaches knowledge, does not teach adaptability and curiosity and creativity. So a whole lot is going to have to change if we want to prepare the workforce of the future.
Wow. Over to you, Erik. So you've coined the phrase the Turing trap after Turing. Can you tell us what that's all about and how that might enable people to optimize in the future?
Sure. This is one of the big challenges for our society going forward. Many of you know about the Turing test, this idea that if we could make AI that perfectly mimicked humans, that was the ultimate goal of research. I think it's a very inspiring goal. It's also exactly the wrong goal. And too many researchers have been focused on making the machines more and more similar to humans. And the Turing trap highlights that this is actually something that could be very destructive in terms of value creation and also in terms of value distribution. For one thing, the Turing test, I hate to say it, is actually too low a goal, too unambitious. Trying to make a machine that merely does what people do is lowballing it. We can have machines that do amazing things that go way beyond what we do. Imagine if Henry Ford had said, my goal is to make a car that walks as fast as a human or runs as fast as a human. That would have been kind of lame, don't you think? And by the same token, right now, merely doing what we're doing and just taking the costs out is not what we should be doing. We should be trying to invent, new drugs and discover new ways of new goods and services and do things we've never done before. These technologies are amazing. So that's a higher ceiling. The other thing is that by imitating humans, as an economist, what we see that doing is it creates a technology that's a substitute for human labor rather than a complement for human labor. And Chris was touching on this earlier. If you substitute, what happens in economics is that drives down wages, that drives down incomes, and that leads to more concentration of wealth and power in the people who control the technology and less for workers. On the other hand, if you complement, if you allow people to do new things they never could have done before, that increases wages. For most of the past 200 years, technology has mainly been a complement, and that's why we all have much higher wages than people did 100 or 200 years ago. And that's been great. But if we're turning the corner and trying to start making technology that substitutes for humans, I see that as a very pernicious and destructive approach towards technology creation. So I've been evangelizing that we should avoid the Turing trap of having lower and lower wages and low ceiling on productivity, and instead focus on having AI that complements humans.
Yeah, you were talking earlier, when waiting in the green room, about the fact that training AI is actually of value, and that if we're not careful, we could end up not giving the value to the right people.
That's right. The reporters at Bloomberg and elsewhere. Yeah. So one of the biggest place that large language models, LLMs, get their value is from all the training data. They ingest all the stuff on the web and from news articles and from books and other things that people have written. And that creates a huge amount of value. Unfortunately, our laws, our institutions, it's not very clear about who owns that and what rights there are. There's a lot of confusion in the courts about whether or not there's copyright infringement. And as you know, there's a lot of lawsuits going on. I was meeting with a senator a little while back, and there's going to be some new legislation coming out that helps clarify that. But ultimately, as an economist, what I would like to see is incentives for value creation being enhanced rather than destroyed. And that means content creators should get a share of the value that they create. Figuring out exactly how to allocate that is a tricky economic and mathematical problem. I'm working with Gabriel Unger and Zoe Hitzig and some other postdocs and folks at Stanford and elsewhere to develop a model of that. But ultimately, I see a new economy where trillions of dollars of value is created, and the incentives go back to the people who are making that value creation possible. It's going to require a new kind of economics of information to make that work. But if we do that, we're going to be not only creating value, but also making sure it goes to the people who made it possible.
So, Chris, I'd like to turn back to you on that, because I think, we just sort of touched on some of the ethics, if you like, and I think it's important to have some guardrails. What guardrails do you see as being the most important to optimize the the use of AI going forward?
Yeah, so it's clear AI is probably the most extraordinary technology and tool that humans have ever invented. We have never invented.
Maybe our last invention, right?
There's a whole discussion about that. There is no tool or system that's ever been invented that is powerful that is only good, right? So you have to ask, first of all, who is it being developed for? So if we spend all of our time trying to develop things just to replace humans, we probably won't get as much value as we can, but that also clearly is not going to lead to good results for humanity. If we think about, and one of the things, so Indeed is, we build tools for employers, but we're a job seeker first company. So our business is about how are we using AI to help people connect with opportunity, to be able to do it faster, to be able to find the best jobs. When we look at that, my belief is that where we are today, responsible AI is the civil rights and human rights issue of my lifetime, full stop. AI is built on top of data, and data comes from our existing systems. And if you look at employment, you look at housing, education, healthcare, the criminal justice system, there are massive inequities in those systems. And what these AI tools do is they look for patterns and they reinforce them. And so not only if you have a system that has bias embedded in it, will that bias be encoded and scaled. There's actually a huge amount of research that shows that generative AI systems magnify that bias. And so if you don't come with intention from the very start and say, we're trying to design a system that can mitigate bias, that can be as fair as possible, then things are going to get dramatically worse across the board. And so we have, 6 years ago, established a responsible AI team. We saw that this is going to be something that we had to get far out ahead of. We view responsible AI, the term for it is it is a socio-technical problem. So it's not, we don't believe it's a technical problem with purely technical solutions. You have to actually understand the social constructs around which these systems are built. We have a team of researchers that are computer scientists, but also sociologists and astrophysicists, and we brought a whole bunch of people together to look at these systems, and we're designing from first principles, how do we measure and mitigate that bias? How do we create a system that produces as fair output as possible? And if we can do that, then we can actually create a future that is better for everyone, but that has to be done with intention.
If I could just add to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Chris is right that these systems can often codify and amplify bias, but they can also dramatically reduce it. And one of the things that we found is that often AI systems are easier to debias than we humans are. Humans are biased too. You got to compare what's happening. So there's been research now on bank lending, on hiring, on medical decisions, on parole decisions, where in each case the AI system was able to reduce the bias out there. You can go through and scan through it. So the kind of work that Chris and his team has been doing, more and more companies are doing that. Lindsay Raymond and Danielle Lee, a couple of my co-authors, have a paper in hiring in particular, where this has led to higher outcomes and more diversity and less bias when you create the right kind of AI systems. So I actually see this as a hopeful sign that we can use AI to reduce some of the pernicious problems that we've had in our society for a long time.